Good evening. Today, the United States faces multiple crises, from deadly winter storms to major infrastructure disruptions. Over 150 lives have been lost in record-breaking snow and ice, while Texas continues recovery efforts following historic flooding. Meanwhile, national security, international diplomacy, and high-profile legal developments are making headlines across the country. In the next few minutes, we'll break down the top 5 stories you need to know today, providing clarity, context, and what they mean for you. U.S. and Israel launch major combat operations in Iran. Tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran have been escalating for years, rooted in disputes over Iran's nuclear ambitions, its ballistic missile program, and its influence across the Middle East through allied militias. Israel has long viewed Iran's missile and nuclear capabilities as existential threats, while successive U.S. administrations have used a mix of sanctions, diplomacy, and military deterrence to limit Iran's strategic reach. In recent weeks, diplomatic efforts aimed at de-escalation and nuclear restraint stalled, leaving military options increasingly prominent in public and private discussions. Regional instability, ongoing proxy conflicts, and heightened military deployments by all sides created conditions in which direct confrontation became more likely. President Donald Trump confirmed that U.S. and Israeli forces initiated what he described as major combat operations against targets inside Iran. According to official statements, the strikes focused on elements of Iran's ballistic missile program, a capability Western governments have repeatedly identified as a central security concern. Reports from Iranian state media and international observers indicated explosions in Tehran and other urban and military-linked locations. While precise details about the scope of damage, casualties, or the full list of targets were not immediately available, both U.S. and Israeli officials framed the operation as a coordinated military action aimed at degrading Iran's strategic capabilities. In his remarks, President Trump also addressed the Iranian public, urging them to take over their government, language that signals political pressure alongside military force. Iranian authorities condemned the strikes, describing them as violations of sovereignty and warning of consequences, though no verified counteraction details were released at the time. From a newsroom and defense analysis standpoint, this development marks a significant escalation from indirect confrontation to open, declared military action. Coordinated U.S. Israeli strikes suggest a high degree of intelligence sharing and strategic alignment, indicating that diplomatic channels were either exhausted or deprioritized in favor of immediate military objectives. Experts note several key factors. Target selection. Focusing on ballistic missile infrastructure reflects long-standing concerns that such systems could deliver both conventional and unconventional payloads, altering the regional balance of power. Public confirmation. Official acknowledgement by the U.S. president signals intent to deter further Iranian action and reassure allies, while also preparing domestic and international audiences for potential retaliation. Political messaging. Calling on the Iranian population to challenge its leadership adds a political dimension that goes beyond military objectives, raising questions about regime stability and international norms. Analysts caution that even limited strikes carry risks of miscalculation. Iran maintains relationships with regional actors capable of responding asymmetrically, and past conflicts in there. For the United States, direct involvement in large-scale operations against Iran has immediate implications for troop safety, regional bases, energy markets, and diplomatic relations. U.S. allies in Europe and the Middle East are closely watching for signs of escalation that could affect trade routes, oil supplies, and civilian security. Globally, the strikes raise concerns about broader instability in the Middle East. Iran is a key player in global energy markets, and any sustained conflict could disrupt supply chains, drive up prices, and impact economies worldwide. International institutions and governments are also weighing how this confrontation affects non-proliferation efforts and the credibility of diplomatic mechanisms designed to prevent armed conflict. Military and intelligence agencies are expected to assess damage and monitor Iranian responses. Diplomatic efforts may intensify behind the scenes to prevent further escalation. Regional allies and international organizations will likely call for restraint and clarification of objectives. Markets and security analysts will continue to evaluate the risk of prolonged conflict or retaliatory actions. Bill Clinton testifies in historic Epstein deposition. The case of Jeffrey Epstein has remained one of the most consequential scandals involving wealth, power, and accountability in modern U.S. history. Epstein, a financier with deep connections to political, business, and cultural elites, died in federal custody in 2019 while facing sex trafficking charges. His death did not end scrutiny of his network. Instead, it intensified public and legal efforts to determine who knew what, and when, about his criminal conduct. Over the years, civil lawsuits, investigative reporting, and court-ordered document releases have continued to surface names of high-profile individuals who interacted with Epstein socially or professionally. While inclusion in records does not imply criminal wrongdoing, public attention has increasingly focused on transparency and sworn testimony from those linked to Epstein's circle. Former President Bill Clinton has long acknowledged limited social contact with Epstein in the early 2000s, primarily related to philanthropic travel. Until now, Clinton had not testified under oath in connection with Epstein-related proceedings, making this deposition a notable legal and political moment. According to the headline, Bill Clinton provided sworn testimony in a deposition concerning his past association with Jeffrey Epstein. Following the deposition, Clinton publicly denied any knowledge of Epstein's criminal activities or of the abuse later attributed to him. The testimony coincided with the release of newly unsealed or newly disclosed files, which reportedly reignited calls for additional high-profile figures to testify under oath. These files are part of broader legal proceedings aimed at clarifying the extent of Epstein's network and identifying any individuals who may bear legal responsibility or possess material knowledge relevant to ongoing cases. Clinton's legal team reiterated that the former president has never been accused of a crime related to Epstein, and that his interactions with Epstein were limited, non-criminal, and unrelated to Epstein's illicit conduct. No charges were announced in connection with Clinton's testimony. From a newsroom standpoint, the significance of this deposition lies less in new allegations and more in accountability through sworn testimony. Depositions require witnesses to answer questions under oath, subject to penalties for perjury, which raises the legal threshold above prior public statements or interviews. Legal analysts note three important aspects: transparency and record building. Depositions help establish a formal evidentiary record. Even when testimony denies wrongdoing, it can clarify timelines, relationships, and inconsistencies across multiple accounts. Public confidence in institutions. When former presidents or other senior officials testify, it reinforces the principle that no individual is categorically beyond legal scrutiny. Chain effect. High-profile testimony often leads to increased pressure on other well-known figures named in documents to provide sworn statements of their own. At the same time, experts caution against conflating association with culpability. Epstein deliberately cultivated relationships with influential individuals, which complicates efforts to distinguish between social proximity and criminal knowledge. Journalistic standards emphasize that appearing in documents or testimony does not equate to criminal liability without corroborated evidence. Politically, the deposition adds another chapter to a long-running issue that continues to surface during election cycles and periods of heightened public distrust in elite institutions. In the United States, the Epstein case has become symbolic of broader concerns about unequal accountability and the perceived ability of powerful individuals to avoid scrutiny. Clinton's deposition may strengthen calls for consistent legal standards regardless of status or office held. Globally, the case is watched as an example of how democratic systems handle allegations involving elite networks. Transparency in legal proceedings, even years after the original crimes, is seen by many observers as essential to maintaining public trust in judicial processes. For victims and survivors of abuse, continued legal action and disclosure can represent both accountability and recognition, even when cases do not result in new criminal charges. Attorneys and courts will continue reviewing newly released files for relevance to ongoing civil cases. Pressure may increase for other individuals named in Epstein-related documents to testify under oath. Media organizations and legal analysts will examine Clinton's testimony alongside other sworn statements for consistency. Courts may determine whether additional depositions or disclosures are necessary as part of broader proceedings. Pentagon replaces Anthropic with OpenAI following AI dispute. Artificial intelligence has rapidly become a strategic asset for national security, shaping everything from intelligence analysis to logistics, cybersecurity, and battlefield decision-making. Over the past 2 years, the U.S. government has increasingly relied on private AI firms to supply advanced large language models and decision support systems. At the center of this shift are two rival companies. OpenAI, one of the most prominent developers of generative AI systems, and Anthropic, a firm founded by former OpenAI researchers with a strong emphasis on AI safety and alignment. The Department of Defense has been testing and integrating AI tools for classified and unclassified use, making vendor selection both a technological and political decision. This backdrop turned volatile after President Donald Trump reportedly ordered federal agencies to halt the use of Anthropic's technology, citing concerns raised during an internal dispute over policy compliance, governance, or national security alignment. According to the headline, the Department of Defense signed a major, described as blockbuster, contract with OpenAI within hours of the presidential order restricting Anthropic's technology across federal agencies. The timing suggests a rapid pivot rather than a long procurement transition. Anthropic, previously positioned as a key AI provider or contender for government contracts, was effectively sidelined. OpenAI emerged as the immediate replacement, securing a high-profile and potentially long-term defense partnership. No public evidence in the headline indicates wrongdoing by Anthropic. Instead, the move appears rooted in policy, trust, and alignment issues rather than technical failure. From a newsroom and policy analysis standpoint, this decision is significant for several reasons. Speed of execution. Federal technology contracts, especially at the Pentagon, usually take months or years. A same-day shift signals direct White House involvement and extraordinary political urgency. Centralization of AI power. By moving away from Anthropic and toward OpenAI, the federal government consolidates influence around a single dominant AI provider. Critics warn this could reduce competition and increase dependency. AI as a political instrument. The episode highlights how AI vendors are no longer just technology partners but political actors whose governance philosophies, leadership decisions, and compliance stances can trigger executive action. National security framing. Even without public details, labeling the dispute as a federal concern elevates AI from a commercial tool to a strategic asset comparable to defense contractors and weapon systems. Legal experts also note that executive orders affecting private tech firms often face scrutiny if they lack transparent justification, especially when followed by lucrative contracts awarded to competitors. In the U.S., this move could reshape how federal agencies evaluate AI vendors, prioritizing political alignment and executive trust alongside performance and safety. It also sets a precedent. AI firms may now face sudden exclusion from government work based on policy disputes rather than technical audits. Globally, the decision sends a strong signal. Allies and rivals alike are watching how the U.S. integrates AI into defense infrastructure. Countries developing their own military AI strategies may see this as confirmation that state-aligned AI ecosystems are becoming the norm. For the tech industry, the message is clear. Access to government contracts increasingly depends on more than innovation. It depends on alignment with national policy and leadership. Congressional committees may seek clarification on the reasons behind Anthropic's removal. OpenAI's role within defense systems will likely expand, raising questions about oversight and safeguards. Other AI firms may adjust governance, compliance, or public positioning to avoid similar exclusion. Legal and regulatory debates over executive power in tech procurement are likely to intensify. Paramount Skydance finalizes merger with Warner Bros. Discovery. The global media industry is in the middle of a historic consolidation wave. Traditional studios are under pressure from streaming wars, rising production costs, shrinking cable revenues, and the dominance of tech-driven platforms. At the center of this shakeup are legacy giants like Warner Bros. Discovery, formed from the 2022 Warner Media, Discovery Merger, and Paramount Skydance, a powerful alliance blending Paramount's historic library with Skydance's modern blockbuster engine. Meanwhile, streaming leader Netflix had been widely rumored as a potential bidder, until it abruptly stepped back, clearing the path for a dramatic industry realignment. Warner Bros. Discovery has now signed a definitive merger agreement with Paramount Skydance, formally locking in one of the largest media deals of the decade. The agreement comes shortly after Netflix withdrew from negotiations, reportedly unwilling to absorb legacy cable assets or regulatory exposure. With Netflix out, Warner Bros. Discovery moved quickly to finalize terms, signaling urgency and confidence in scale-driven survival. This merger brings together Warner Bros., film and TV empire, Discovery's unscripted and global cable reach, Paramount's historic franchises, Skydance's blockbuster-focused production pipeline. From a strategic standpoint, this merger reflects defensive consolidation rather than expansion. Key drivers include streaming economics reality check. The growth at all costs streaming era is over. Studios are now prioritizing profitability, scale, and content efficiency. Content library power. Combined, the companies control one of the deepest libraries in Hollywood history, vital for licensing, bundling, and international markets. Negotiating leverage. A larger entity gains leverage against distributors, advertisers, and tech platforms. Netflix's withdrawal as a signal. Netflix stepping back suggests even dominant streamers are cautious about inheriting traditional media liabilities. Industry analysts note that this merger is less about beating Netflix, and more about surviving in a Netflix-shaped world. In the U.S., this deal could reshape streaming bundle strategies, cable channel restructuring, advertising markets, labor negotiations with writers, actors, and producers. Globally, the merger strengthens bargaining power in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, where local competitors and regulators closely watch U.S. media consolidation. Regulatory scrutiny is expected, particularly around competition, media plurality, and consumer choice. But the current political climate appears more tolerant of consolidation framed as economic necessity. Antitrust and regulatory reviews begin. Asset rationalization and possible divestments. Streaming platform rebranding or consolidation. Potential layoffs and restructuring behind the scenes. Executives have signaled that the merged company aims to present itself as a leaner, stronger, and globally competitive media superpower. Massive winter storms cause 150 deaths and widespread disruptions. The United States has experienced an unusually severe winter season, marked by a series of interconnected weather events including heavy snowstorms, ice storms, and extreme cold snaps. Meteorologists attribute this to a combination of polar vortex activity, atmospheric instability, and lingering La Nina effects, creating prolonged periods of extreme cold across much of the country. Historically, winter storms in the U.S. are responsible for hundreds of deaths annually, but the current series of events has been extraordinary in both intensity and geographic spread. Beyond cold-related fatalities, these storms have caused infrastructure failures, transportation shutdowns, and cascading disruptions to energy and supply networks. In Texas, the situation has been compounded by historic flooding following prolonged rainfall, creating a dual crisis of winter weather and water disasters. These floods have overwhelmed local emergency response systems and exacerbated recovery efforts. According to reports, extreme winter weather across multiple states has resulted in over 150 deaths in just over a month. Deaths are attributed to a combination of traffic accidents on icy roads, hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning from heating equipment, and other storm-related hazards. Simultaneously, Texas is recovering from record-breaking floods, which have claimed at least 129 lives, destroyed thousands of homes, and forced the evacuation of tens of thousands of residents. Key highways, bridges, and local utilities have been severely damaged, slowing recovery and aid distribution. Emergency services, including the National Guard and state disaster response teams, have been deployed to assist with rescues, clear roadways, and provide essential services such as food, water, and medical care. Power outages affecting millions have complicated the response, particularly in rural and low-income areas. Authorities continue to monitor rivers, reservoirs, and snowpack levels, warning residents of potential secondary hazards such as ice dams, flash floods, and further transportation disruptions. Meteorologists and disaster management experts emphasize several critical factors. Compound events. This winter illustrates how overlapping disasters, ice storms, snow, and flooding, can magnify risk to human life and infrastructure. Preparedness gaps. While local authorities issue warnings, gaps in infrastructure and emergency response capacity, particularly in rural regions, have exacerbated the death toll. Climate patterns. Experts are debating how climate change may contribute to increased volatility in winter weather patterns, including heavier precipitation and abrupt cold snaps. Recovery complexity. States like Texas face layered challenges of flood recovery alongside ongoing winter conditions, stretching resources and complicating relief efforts. Analysts note that while weather-related fatalities are always a public concern, these events underline systemic vulnerabilities in infrastructure, public communication, and community resilience. Domestically, the storm impacts public safety, energy reliability, and economic productivity. Transportation networks are disrupted, schools and businesses remain closed in affected regions, and federal resources are heavily engaged in recovery. Globally, extreme weather events in the U.S. are closely watched because they can disrupt agricultural exports, energy markets, and international supply chains. Severe flooding and winter storms may also influence insurance markets and highlight the increasing importance of climate resilience planning. The human toll, over 150 lives lost, underscores the ongoing challenge of mitigating risk during extreme weather, particularly as events grow more frequent and intense. Emergency response and disaster recovery will continue for weeks, particularly in Texas. Authorities will assess infrastructure failures and prioritize rebuilding, including roads, bridges, and power systems. Meteorologists continue to monitor storm systems, issuing ongoing warnings for vulnerable regions. Policy discussions may accelerate on infrastructure resilience, flood control, and emergency preparedness.